everybody, to the first live SportsLine Model Show. I'm your host, Mackenzie Brooks, and I am joined by the team behind the numbers. These are the guys working on the SportsLine simulation, how we get these projections, how we come up with all these numbers, led by Stephen O. We have Jake, Derek, and John with us, all bringing in their own niche talents and analytics to the show. So we're going to do some quick introductions first. Stephen, you've been working on this all year long to get the show going. So why don't you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, so I've been working in this industry of doing projections and using a Monte Carlo simulation since 2004. So since me and Mackenzie was born around there, and John had just learned to ride a bike, I think, and Jake was in diapers. But so for the last few years, I've had this team join me, and it's been great because the model is at its best, not when it's giving you all the picks and you're just blindly following it, but when you have skilled people who understand gambling, understand fantasy, and understand the sport, even from an X&O standpoint, steering things. So we've assembled a team here that has been doing some great work, largely behind the scenes. A lot of our conversations that we were having about the games, breaking down the games, were just being wasted on us. And so what we wanted to do was explain to subscribers out there and anybody watching us how our model works and how to best use our model, because it's not always clear. So for that, I designed all the models, but at the same time, a lot of the analysis and data analytics that you'll see are based on the thoughts of Derek, John, and Jake. And then I do specialize on managing the NFL, fantasy football projections, and NBA primarily.
Yeah. John, it seems like the people in the chat are pumped up to see you again, the great return. What do you have to say to your fans?
I'm excited to see everybody as well. It's great to be back. Obviously, a lot of y'all know me from Early Edge, but for those who don't know me, quick introduction. I got my statistics master's degree from Tulane, and then that kind of parlayed me into a role with the Tulane baseball team when I was working with them. And after that job, I got a role with the Blue Jays in player development and high performance. So, and then worked for them for a season, learned a ton, and then Steven found me, and I've been with CBS ever since. So excited to be back. Glad to get into this.
Absolutely. And so the people are pumped up for Jake too. The Fett Show is here. Jake, what do you have to say to the people?
Yeah, I love that nickname that AB gave me. So some people are familiar. AB, John, and I do a lot of college baseball coverage. I'm a double SEC alum. I graduated undergrad from University of Florida. And then I was actually originally going to go the medical route, follow my family's footsteps and become a dentist. I completely switched up and went to sports. I got my master's degree in sports analytics from University of Mississippi. And I just love sports. I do a little bit of everything for the team, but my main expertise are college sports, college football, college basketball, and then this past year we got into college baseball.
Awesome. And then we have Derek. Derek is the man behind our injuries and trades. He is following just about everything and everyone on Twitter to keep us up to date. So Derek, tell them a little bit about what you do.
So what I do is my background, first of all. So I know the X's and O's of basketball from my time of being a student assistant at the University of Toledo. So I was actually, one of my first jobs there was to look at film of basically Michigan State at the time. They were ranked 18th in the country. And I was supposed to go and look at all of the games for like the last 5 games of them, and then break down the starting 5. And after that, I got the bug of actually paying attention more closely with the different ins and outs of basketball, even though I did play it, but then I learned more from working with those coaches that were brighter than my high school coaches, unfortunately. But so I got my master's degree in sports administration. And then at that time, I was working with actually CBS doing data entry. And so looking at all of those data and making sure that it is correct. And then with my knowledge of actually learning how to look at different sports like the X's and O's, and then come into like betting and doing the different things of learning like how they set lines. And so you add in all of that together, looking at data, who's injured, and then you can come up with different projections, and then using the model that we have, then it just comes all together. So with all the different steps that I had, it lead me into this position that I'm in now.
Yeah, absolutely. So we do have the dream team here. little bit about me. Just graduated from the University of Georgia in May. Intern at ESPN last summer with the stats and insight team. So I have a little bit of computer coding background myself, a little bit of sports broadcasting. So my job is to make this intimidating model seem very digestible to you guys. So we're going to show you the model. We're going to get right into it with daily picks. We're going to go into the MLB. Don't freak out when you see the model. We're going to break it down for you. It'll be easy. So we're going to start with our baseball wizards, John and Jake. This is where you guys shine. So you guys tell us what you're seeing today, what kind of value you're seeing in our model.
Yeah. Well, first, I think if we want to get into it, we've got to give you guys a quick introduction to the model in a sense. So a lot of you guys haven't seen the actual background of the model. And this is kind of what we see behind the scenes. All you really see on SportsLine are the computer grade picks. So you guys see A pick, B pick, or C pick for any of the major sports. And that's what the models that we use produce. So essentially, we're going to give you what we agree with in terms of value on the model and what we disagree with, give you some plays that the model thinks of as well. So the one play that we have today that we have value on that we agree with is the Dodgers against the Blue Jays. The best line is the money line -130 on Caesars. Last time I checked, might have moved since then. I wouldn't be surprised if there's some sharp money coming in on the Dodgers. But these two starting pitchers have massive home road splits. Julio Urias is 5-1 with a 2.15 ERA at home this season in 6 starts. Chris Bassett's 4-4 with a 5.81 ERA on the road in 11 starts. Both bullpens are extremely worked, but the Dodgers bullpen is first in the league in ERA in July, while the Blue Jays are ranked 8th. The Blue Jays also won't have their closer available, Jordan Romano, after pitching 4 of the last 5 days, while the Dodgers likely have all of their bullpen available. So Trevor Richards also will likely be unavailable after pitching 29 pitches yesterday for the Blue Jays. He's been dominant for them out of the bullpen. So we really like the Dodgers on the money line here as our model pick.
Yeah, absolutely. And Steven, if you go back to that other screen right here, go back. Yeah. What are we looking at here when you look at that? Sorry, one more back, Steven. So we're looking at this money line percentage and the sim percentage up at the top. If you can circle around with your mouse there, what exactly are we looking at here? I know these are some of the key numbers that the model is projecting.
Yeah, so the open is where the line opens. So we saw it open at -155 last night. Money line is currently where it is. I believe these are consensus lines. Steven can double check me there, but so -145 right now consensus. And we saw the best line on Caesars at -130. So that's where we suggest you guys take it. You go one column to the right, you got your money line percentage. That's the implied odds of the money line, -145. So -145 without the juice that the book adds equals 57% chance of winning. However, the sim percentage has the Dodgers winning 68.5% of the time. So we have over 10% of value, over 11% of value here on this play. Usually we like to see 10% of value for it to be an A pick. So that's why we've got an A pick here.
And there's good value when John goes against the Blue Jays.
It's a good point.
That's the key we look at here. So this money line percentage column is what the odds makers are implying.
That's the implied. So -145 is equivalent to 57%.
Right. Okay. So then our sims imply a 68.5% chance of the money line hitting.
Yes.
Exactly.
Cool stuff. So then we also have some player props I know you guys liked. If you want to talk a little bit about those.
Yeah, today is Dinger Tuesday. FanDuel has a promotion on Tuesday, so I love tweeting out my favorite home run props. I'm on 2 today. I'm on Christian Walker on Arizona. We also have good value on the over in this game, and so kind of correlates with having a home run prop. Steven Matz has been in and out of the bullpen, and as a starter, he hasn't been as efficient lately. He's coming off one of his best starts of the season, but I kind of like him to get rocked today, coming off of a good start. He's been giving up a ton of hits. He hasn't been giving up a ton of home runs, but I like the spot for Christian Walker. We have him at +412 to hit a home run. On FanDuel, you get him at +470. So you're getting some pretty good value there. Christian Walker, I think we've played him on like 3 of the last 8 Dinger Tuesdays, and he's hit at 2 or 3 of those times. So he's been good to us, and why not keep riding Christian Walker? it's a good match against a lefty too.
Yeah. And you mentioned that this correlates with the over in the same game. What can we look at the model to determine that pick?
Yeah, so the line is set at 9 on Caesars, and we have 9.7 runs being scored, so close to 10 runs being scored. We have the over hitting in 47.7% of the sims, but that's because there's a decent chance that it's a push. If it's a 5-4 game, 6-3 game, so you get some push insurance with that. I don't mind playing like an alternate line total, or both teams to score like 2.5 or 2 runs. That could be a good play for you, but I think the over is a good play here.
Right, and again, anyone in the chat. Yeah, and anyone in the chat who's curious about their own teams or own player props, we have access to really all of it. So if you're curious about anything through the whole show, please let us know. I'll be looking in the chat to answer your guys' questions. And then do we have any other,
there's one more home run prop in the Subway Series. Someone just asked about the Subway Series, the Yankees versus the Mets. Big series for the Yankees, especially. They just swept the Royals. They pretty much need to win the next couple of games to determine if they're going to be buyers or sellers. I don't think they're going to sell. Being a Yankee fan myself, I would sell. I think this team, it has too many needs, too many holes. But we do have a prop in that game. I'm on Brandon Nimmo to homer at plus 480. There's just a little value here. Our Sims have him at plus 466. So you're still getting a little value there, but not a ton. But I think this is a good matchup against Domingo Germán, who tends to give up homers. And you got a lefty, and you got the short porch in Yankee Stadium. I think it's a good matchup for Nimmo, and he looked good against the Yankees in the earlier series this season.
Cool.
That is quite the play.
We're getting some questions about this Cubs game. So, Steven, would you want to do a little live look into that and see what we have value on?
Yes. So I actually really like the Cubs here. This is one of those where we don't agree with the model. So this does happen a lot, right? And you guys will kind of notice why there aren't as many model picks, because in order for there to be a model pick, we need lots of value in the model, and we need me and Jake to agree with it, right? Whereas Jake and I won't go into the model, and if we have 2% value, we won't upgrade something just because we like it. So we really need a lot of people to agree for there to be a pick. This one I really don't like. The Cubs have been playing very well lately. Kyle Hendricks has been pitching very well overall. The White Sox haven't been playing as well lately. Michael Kopech's been struggling. He can limit the damage in terms of runs, but he gives up tons of walks, and I don't think that's a good scenario for the Cubs. The White Sox bullpen has also been brutal lately. The Cubs are kind of still in a race in terms of winning the division, making a wild card spot, while the White Sox are completely out. So I like the Cubs there, if anything. So we don't really like the value in the model.
Yeah, I agree with John here. Steven just highlighted that the White Sox have lost 5 of the last 6. They were probably going to trade all their guys who have any value at this point, because they're definitely sellers. The Cubs at this point aren't sellers. The NL Central is still within grasp, even though they're a little bit back. And Kyle Hendricks has been good. I think I would be on the Cubs if anything. You see that there's no value in the model. I'd probably stay off, but I wouldn't bet on the White Sox here. I'd stay far away from the White Sox anyway near the trade deadline.
An interesting thing here is, you notice the opening line, consensus line was White Sox minus 117, which is pretty much exactly what our sim would buy. Mm-hmm. So what we do, one thing that makes us different from your standard pick service or handicapper is, if you imagine odds makers try to generate essentially a normal curve of what's going to happen, right? If the point spread's 3, you think, half the bell curve's on this side, half the bell curve's on that side. The simulations that I program, these Monte Carlo simulations, basically generate that same curve. And 90% of the time, our curve is the same as the odds makers curve. So we've basically successfully re-engineered the odds makers model. So when there's a difference between our model and the current line, it's 95% of the time it's due to a public narrative or some kind of recent statistic or an injury or some other factor that doesn't fit your normal, picture. So in this case, there's, for the reasons that Jake and John said, there's 82% of the public are taking the Cubs, because they're still in it and these other factors. And so, yeah, it's interesting. This is one of those cases where, you got to see, does recency, does motivation, does, whatever other factor that doesn't usually fit. Um, does that weigh more than the hundreds of games of stats that we have and the brilliance of my model? So it's really about, do you have, if the White Sox win 6-3, who is going to pay? Should we have some kind of like a downgrade jar or something? Or how dare you go against me jar? But all right, never mind. Sorry.
we bet personally against Steven's model, put $5 down against the model.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I will say, so using this model, the 82% of the money coming in on the money line, we really like seeing the line actually moving, right? From -101 to -115. If we saw, say, 82% of the money coming in on the Cubs and the line was sticking still, that would worry me because it's reverse line movement, right? Or kind of just sticking still when we get all the money coming in one side. So it is good to see that the line is moving normally.
Would you guys think that Cubs backers should go right now before they lose more value?
Well, I think it's because they noticed that it opened around even. And so all the Cubs bettors jumped on it. I bet it last night, like same idea, to try to get it +100. And it's been switching between -110 and -115 today that I've seen. So
okay, so it's probably safe so people don't have to move right now before it gets to -120, -125 or something.
Correct. I don't think it'll get too unplayable. I don't think it'll go higher than -120.
All right. Well, we have our first man versus machine. We got two men and John and Jake going against the machine. So let's see what happens.
Yeah. So yeah, as you guys can see, like we really only want to give you these picks that we see value on. That's the whole point of this model is where we see our discrepancies with the odds makers. That's where we really find the value. So Steven mentioned, sometimes going against the public narrative or the public opinion, which our NFL future that we have for today kind of goes along with that. But before we get there, Jake or John or the chat, was there anything else in the MLB world that we wanted to look into before we head to NFL?
You want to look at futures real quick?
Yeah, we can look at futures real fast. And so obviously, guys, this is our first show, so we won't be able to get to as many fan questions as possible and answer your questions specifically. But as we go on and do more of these shows, we want to make it very interactive with y'all. We want to answer the questions that y'all are asking about. So please ask questions, comment, and we'll bring it up and answer them specifically. But we'll get into the MLB futures real fast. So we've been doing a couple pilots to get ready for this show. And I feel like every pilot I've come on and given a new Orioles prop or future play. The most recent pilot, I got Orioles +420 to win the division. Now I think it's about even. So there's not nearly as much value there, but I still like the Orioles to win the World Series. And that's my most recent futures play. You can get around +2,000. This team just broke the record of the post-war era record. I need to emphasize that for a second. Post-war era of 80 consecutive series without being swept. That beats the Dodgers of last year and 2 years ago, I believe. And
the Braves too.
Yeah, the Braves. Sorry, not the Dodgers last year. Good call. The Braves of last year, who I believe it was 79 consecutive series. So this Orioles team has been playing extremely well for a very long time now. They're so deep in their lineup. They just added Grayson Rodriguez back to their starting rotation, and they kind of didn't even really need him. They were playing so well. They've got dominant bullpen with Batista and Cano in the back end, even add Danny Coulomb. So they're going to trade, and they're going to get better as well. So I think any future for the Orioles right now is fair game. I think they're going to go on a roll, and I think they're going to finish. I do think they're going to finish the AL with the best record.
Yeah, so one thing the model doesn't take it into account is prospects. So Baltimore has the #1 farm system in MLB. They have 8 top 100 players in the MLB top in their last update. If you look at MLB.com/prospects, you see all the top 100 prospects. They have 8. That's just an insane amount. Their biggest weakness is their pitching. And they can use those prospects and get a pretty good haul of pitchers. And so our model doesn't take that into account. So that's why John likes them better than our model likes them.
Yeah, if I could add a few points there about Baltimore, as I'm from Baltimore, so I have the right to, show tough love. And I always tell the story. The first non-Korean man that I ever met and shook hands with was Brooks Robinson. So, and I went to church in the same parking lot as Memorial Stadium. But enough about me. The reason why the model's not high in Baltimore, and the model only has them at 1.7% chance to win the World Series, which is well under their odds implied percentage. It's because run differential, point differential, goal differential, depending on the sport, isn't the only predictor of record or how good you are, but it's pretty darn good, right? And so if you look purely on run differential, Baltimore's 49 is 1/3 of Tampa's, right? And Baltimore's 62 wins is probably 7 or 8 above what you would normally see with the run differential they have. And so that's really fueling it. And then why they're doing especially bad in our our playoff simulations is the simulations I'm running assume health, and so we identify the top 4 starters for teams, and then in the simulations, the ones are against the ones, twos are against the twos, threes against the threes, fours against the fours. So with Baltimore not having superstar one, two starting pitchers, they're getting outplayed the Sims. Game one, game two, game five, game six. We're assuming a four-man rotation, so the first starter gets 1 and 5, two, so on and so forth. So the configuration of this model, which does really well for a lot of teams, is just doesn't fit in Baltimore. Unfortunately, a lot of times the reason why you might love a team, scrappiness, ability to step up, clutchness, all these things is like the exact reason why the model would hate them. So that's why we need, again, baseball fans and people like John who focus on even player performance. We're looking for that perfect situation where the model sim basis, which we know 90% replicates the odds makers, completely matches what our eye test or and those kind of things. So in this case, Baltimore doesn't match, and so it's whose numbers do you want to buy in.
And I think a lot of that is the Orioles actually have the best record in the league in one-run games. They're 17-9 now. And Steven, you said they're overperforming the record by about 8 games or so?
Yeah, there you go. So it's like, so what the story is,
it matches perfectly.
Yeah, you want to bet Baltimore this year and maybe expect some regression next year, depending on what happens, or if you believe in Jake's farm system theory.
I'm all into next year.
Yeah,
the thing is, they're performing this well a year ahead of schedule, but I love this Baltimore team.
Yeah, the thing is, one-run games are a very good predictor of how good a team is and when they'll regress to the mean. But teams that win a lot of one-run games also have really good bullpens. So if you look at Batista and Cano, that's why they're there. And then I want to answer a quick question, Mackenzie, if you could bring Rebecca O'Connor's question.
Yeah, I had that marked. I was ready for that.
So yeah, quick question. The model does not factor in wind or weather. So that's a big thing where Jake and I will come in and we'll check the weather manually, or we'll check to see if it's raining, if the wind's blowing out, specifically Wrigley. So you'll notice, if you guys have been longtime SportsLine subscribers, the projected scores at Wrigley are always a little different, or I should say like a lot more different, because the wind affects the scores there so much. But our model doesn't factor in for wind. That's where Jake and I come in.
It does take into account past results, but so in a sense, it does take it into account barely, but not as much as you would want.
Yeah, if the model accounted for all that, then it would just be me looking at you. So when I was for the first 5 years and 10 years before that, when I was running all these leagues by myself, I was overworked and overstressed, and I wasn't the most delightful person to be around. But as I found people who actually love baseball and can operate this stuff, their job is to say, okay, model, it's sort of like a self-driving feature in a Tesla. It's pretty good, but I was in my brother's and he just cruised right to a stop sign the other day. So you need people who know what they're doing to steer.
Yeah, and sometimes the most sophisticated models are the worst, because they factor in so many things that it messes up everything else. And then one future that I'm on that the model actually agrees on at this point is the Marlins. They're another team that's overperformed their record. If you look at the run differential, I tweeted out about a week ago, 2 weeks ago, Marlins to miss the playoffs at plus 150. We have missing the playoffs in around 67% of our sims as of this morning. You could get them at minus 120 on DraftKings to miss the playoffs. Minus 120 is equivalent to around 55% implied odds. So you get 12% value still. they've been terrible since the All-Star break. I think that they're playing now that their record implies that they should have been playing all season. If you look at their Pythagorean win-loss record, they should be like 10 games below 500. They really have been outperforming. They sent down Yuri Perez because he'd never gone this far into a season. He'd been hurt in the minors, and that's really cost them big time. I think they should bring him up as soon as possible, but you don't want to risk his future health. But they've definitely overperformed so far, and you can see that they're regressing back to the mean.
So this is another factor for Miami is their strength of schedule is going to be a lot harder going forward. So what this data set shows you is using the team's actual win-loss, each team's win-loss percentage, home and away. So each team is considered two different teams in the situation. Year to date, Miami's opponents have a composite 49.1% win percentage. The rest of the season is 52.5%. And so the difference makes it having the second toughest record the rest of the season. This data set is a similar logic, only instead of using the team's actual win-loss, we're using our simulations percentages to rank the team. And based on the model, we consider Miami having the hardest schedule the rest of the way. Or not the hardest schedule necessarily, but the biggest gap between, year to date and the rest of the way. So yeah, this is why the model is not high on Miami. In addition to the fact that they have a negative 22 run differential and shouldn't have anywhere near.
They're on the opposite end of the spectrum in terms of one-run games. They're actually very good in one-run games, but they don't have a good bullpen. They've won a couple from errors, a lot of walk-offs. So that's a team that we do expect to regress to the mean in terms of 500 and one-run games, and so does the model.
Yeah, when you look at other teams with similar projected records, their World Series odds are a lot longer than most of the other teams that have their kind of record. Plus 5,000 as of Monday for a 54-win team. San Francisco is even at plus 2,800, maybe struggling. So that's kind of what the odds makers would agree that Miami is legit.
All right, yeah. So that was a solid amount of MLB picks. A few for today, a few futures, which I'm confident that we'll hit from these two. Always up with their MLB knowledge. We're gonna move a little bit into a couple months from now. We're gonna go into NFL futures. This is something we work on all summer. And the model has a lot to say about futures. We really look into, what the public's looking at and where we disagree with the odds makers. So, Steven, I know you are really high on this prop on Tua. The public seems to love Tua. We're not sure we do. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so part of our jobs and probably the most important thing I do is updating the fantasy football projections. And people who watch fantasy football today, which is hopefully everyone here, I'm sure, because it's the #1 show by far, sees the graphics sometimes where we say like the expert consensus ranking or Dave, Jamie, and Heath. One thinks two is overrated and two may think it's underrated. And then you see the SportsLine model where it lies. And so this is the same data that's I powered that data. And what I look for is when my model is significantly deviating from what the experts say. Usually that's because there's some kind of important depth chart change that I'm not aware of and I have to react to something. But in some cases, it's just, really eye-opening. And Tua is an extremely eye-opening situation and bizarre for two reasons. Our Sims think Miami is a very good team. Based on the power ranking simulations we have, Miami is the number 9 team. And last year, Tua, when healthy, had a great season. So a couple of numbers were that versus playoff teams, he averaged 2 passing touchdowns a game, which is higher than what he averaged versus non-playoff teams, which is extremely impressive. And so based on that, Tua is currently the 8th rated quarterback among our fantasy football consensus rankings. But in our simulations for the season, he's only 20th, which means like you wouldn't even take him as a starter, which is kind of bizarre. So part of me freaked out when I first saw that, and then I started digging into why that is. And why that is there's, I think, the real average versus playoff teams in passing touchdowns specifically is much lower. So the line is 26.5 passing touchdowns on DraftKings. It went from 26.5 to 25.5 on Caesars. And again, fantasy football, we're projecting 20th quarterback for the year, while he's at 8th in the latest ranking. I'm a Ravens fan, which some of you may know. And so I remember very clearly the 6-touchdown game and 4 in the fourth quarter against the Ravens in week 2. And the Ravens had a great defense by the end of the year. But what people don't realize is Kyle Hamilton, who's a safety and fell in the draft because he ran like a 4.67 on the 40, was lined up against Jalen Waddle because Humphrey was out and a lot of our starting corners were out. And then we had Jalen Armour-Davis, who's a 4th-round rookie who probably won't be on the active roster at any point this year unless there's injuries, and may not ever really be a true NFL player. He was one-on-one on Tyreek Hill. So that's why. So if you remove that game against Baltimore, Tua goes from averaging 20 fantasy points versus playoff teams and 2 passing touchdowns versus playoff teams to 14.1 and 1.2. So that's why. So there's a clear split that if these teams are healthy, the playoff team, his performance against quality defenses falls significantly. Now, our projection for Tua for the year is only around 23 passing touchdowns. Okay. And that's assuming that he plays both seasons. Yeah.
Sorry, real quick before you move on to the toughness of schedule, I just wanted to wrap up quick what we were really talking about there. So against playoff teams, you're saying that he was averaging 2 passing touchdowns a game. But if you remove that one fourth quarter against Baltimore that really skewed everything, he truly only was having 1.2 passing touchdowns per game.
Pretty much, yeah. That's the whole point. And actually, on top of that, he had 2 interceptions, and he should have had a third, but Marcus Williams dropped the easiest one that would have ended the whole game. So if Marcus Williams catches that third interception, which is the easiest one that would have been that game, Tua would have not had, I think, his last 3 touchdowns, or last 2 at least. And all of a sudden, the world changes. But so that's the assumption that in the model, he actually struggles against playoff opponents.
Right.
And then if you look at their actual schedule this year, it's pretty brutal. Point out this data point here. Miami, based on our model, has the 4th hardest schedule of the year. And not surprisingly, the other teams in our division are also up there. I know this is kind of tough to see, but we have here is for this season, their opponents. And our simulation, our projection for win percentage and points scored. I point out the week 1 against the Chargers because we have the exact same projection as the betting line. So our model, once again, is exactly in line with the odds makers' true model as far as setting lines. So that leads me to believe that, okay, they kind of agree that they have a very tough schedule at Tua's line of 26.5 is probably bumped up based on narratives. If the public is all over excited about Tua and him having 30 plus touchdowns, why offer a line of 23.5 when you can offer 26.5? It's just like a few years ago when Baker Mayfield coming off his rookie season, everyone was so positive and he was getting every commercial and he was the 5th rated fantasy quarterback. They offered plus 800 for the Browns to win the Super Bowl, even though they knew that the real odds should have been plus 2,200. Why offer $2,200 when you can offer 800? But anyway, so looking at this schedule in the upcoming for Tua, he's got a lot more tough games against playoff opponents, and this is the touchdowns allowed based on last year, passing touchdowns allowed per game for the playoff teams that he's facing for an average of 1.36, which is well under the 1.8 he would need to average over 15 games, or 1.6 if he played all 17 games. We'll also point out that the only bad defense he's showing on terms of touchdowns allowed is basically his toughest game, which is at Kansas City. So that's never one that you would love to see. Then he's got a brutal non-playoff schedule. New England is actually not that great statistically in touchdowns allowed, but it's still Bill Belichick. And Tua's had a lot to consider the greatest defensive mind. Still the Patriots, still their strength. They obviously have the Jets on their schedule twice. The Titans had a down year last year defensively. That they had so many pass rushers get hurt basically the entire season, but they could quickly bounce back to a team that was the 1 seed 2 years ago. And the only opponent that you would kind of consider easy, favorable fantasy matchup, the Raiders, is until week 11. And so you're not even sure, health reasons. So I'm saying like our model is saying two things about Miami and Tua. Thinks Miami's a very good team. Thinks Tua is a very good quarterback. But very good team, very good quarterback when you have one of the more brutal schedules, especially defending the pass, is the problem. If you look at these numbers, I know again, apologies for the clarity. This is the passer rating allowed for the opponent and the ranking, and you see a lot of single digits. There's 8 teams ranked in the top 10 last year. There's nearly half the schedule. And then if you were to average out these opponents, the average defense on the Miami schedule would be the 12th best pass defense with an average around 87.5 passer rating allowed. So it's just a very tough road ahead. And if you consider also that they are probably a run first team when you look at it, when you consider the shaping up of the draft they had, and now the rumors that they might go after Dalvin Cook as well.
Right.
Yeah. So with just to go off of the passing defenses that they're going against. Well, last year, if you add up all of the passing touchdown averages for the opponents of the defenses that they're going against this year, it adds up to 23.5 touchdowns. That could be plus or minus 0.75 because some teams have like one or two cornerbacks that's not there and their depth has changed, but that's still below the 26.5 that the projections are for the odds makers that they're set it at. And then also there's like eight teams that they're going against, 8 games that they're going against in the top 8 in the Super Bowl odds for this year. And four of those games are going to be against the top 3. So if you don't believe us, that's saying that they're going against a difficult schedule, just look at the odds makers. They're saying the same thing as we are. And then that is saying that those 23.5 touchdowns that were given up by the team average by the teams that they're going against this year, that's Tua playing 17 games. If Tua even miss a game or two, then that brings that total down even more. So that's why we're thinking this 26.5 passing touchdowns is less. Then also we had the looming issue of Tyreek Hill with his charge that he's going to be facing. It might be dropped. Either way it goes, the NFL sometimes suspend people even if they're not charged with anything or if it doesn't go through the court process. So it's going to be unlikely that he reaches that 27 passing touchdowns for the season.
The irony is if you're betting the over on passing touchdowns, A, you want to wait till probably the line comes down. I think it will come down, creep down. And B, you actually probably want Miami to be worse because in some cases they might have a better chance of putting up passing touchdowns if they're playing from behind, because they need to, as opposed to playing from the head where they're going to go run first to run out the clock up from their opponents.
Right. Yeah. So basically, if we put this all together, we remove this Baltimore quarter, we really have him projected at 1.35 passing touchdowns per game. And if he plays 17 games, he could hit that 1.6. But the odds of him playing all 17 games are probably close to none, even with his jiu-jitsu and whatever he is doing.
Make him fall a little bit better, huh, Mackenzie?
Right. Well, we had a quick question in the chat, and I wanted to address it just because we did actually talk about it in our pilot before, and I know Steven likes to talk about Lamar. We'll be really quick with this because we do have things to get through. But basically, we do really like Lamar Jackson over 22.5 passing touchdowns. Yeah. A lot of this has to do with Todd Monken. Steven, do you want to touch on that really quick?
Yeah, so the number was for passing touchdowns is so low, 22.5, which is an insult. So Lamar was leading the league in passing touchdowns the first 4 weeks before Rashad Bateman went out. And then, people forget that not only did Evan Duvernay also go out, we had DeMarcus Robinson was our leading wide receiver by week 10, our number 1 wide receiver. So I love for simple math is Lamar is going to probably reach his projection of 1.7 passing touchdowns a game. Schedule's not nearly as tough as say what Tua has, because he's not MVP level Lamar, which was over 2 a game. But the last 2 years of under 1.4, that was had to do a lot more with Greg Roman's offense and lack of passing schemes. So Todd Monken, one thing that frustrated the hell out of every Ravens fan was how often we got delayed game calls, how often we had a waste of timeout because the play wasn't getting in, and just how scared, how we always got down to like 1 second on the play clock. So Monken is completely changing that around, giving Lamar a lot more freedom to play, to call plays based on what he sees. It's all about pace. And so if you look at the number of plays that Monken's offense has run compared to or the number of pass attempts, based on having more plays and having a higher percentage of passes, I like Lamar to simply just get more passing touchdowns, even if you don't think his efficiency is going to improve with OBJ, Zay Flowers, hopefully a healthy Rashad Bateman. Even if you think his efficiency is the same, just purely on if he can play 14 games with more pass attempts, could be around 3 more a game. That should get you over that 122.5 pass touchdown. In terms of fantasy, we have him as the 5th rated quarterback. Experts have him actually a little higher at 4th. The model is, the thing that I think that model is underestimating is how many easy rushing touchdowns he's going to get. Stetson Bennett last year had like 10 rushing touchdowns. And I remember seeing, they were just, there'd be red zone situations and, the formations that he ran, he just had these wide open lanes. So even if the number of design runs for Lamar goes way down, and even if the overall running for Baltimore goes down, I think the schemes and the better talent will actually open things up so Lamar will have a higher touchdown rate. He doesn't have a very high touchdown rate in his career. Most Ravens fans know that there have been so many of these spectacular plays where he came up like 1 yard short, or even fumbling on the goal line a couple times. So yeah, in the model, when we're running simulations and saying, okay, what's the probability of this player or we're getting the ball on a short yardage goal line situation, and so what's the probability of them scoring? Lamar's stats heading into the season are actually pretty low in terms of his touchdown rate in those situations, which is why the model only has him as the 5th rated quarterback, because we're projecting fewer rushing attempts, fewer rushing yards. I think he's going to actually have 8 rushing touchdowns thanks to Monkey's development.
Right. And you mentioned, go ahead, Derek.
Oh, just one other thing. I just read the other day that they're trying to unlock the Louisville Lamar Jackson. So he was tossing the ball around in Louisville more than he was running. So if he does do that same thing, he should be able to pass the ball more to get more passing touchdowns.
Right. And Steven, you mentioned fantasy. That's another thing we want to show the chat that we're capable of. We work a lot on fantasy projections, ranking, our own players. One player we talked about a lot is Kirk Cousins, which has been talked about, honestly, a lot on CBS HQ and SportsLine. And we really agree with how underrated he is. So, Steven, if you want to get into our Kirk Cousins a little bit.
Yeah, I'll admit that I wasn't going to point out Kirk Cousins until I watched that Netflix series. I was like, oh, I like this guy. He really can. But it's also eye-opening. It's also very eye-opening for a couple of reasons. So he actually had a slightly down statistical year compared to the 2 years prior to last year. But he was QB7 in terms of total fantasy points last year, based on QB6. I'm sorry, based on his average, he was QB9, and so we have him at QB7 heading into this year. And what I love about Kirk Cousins is he's very reliable, but when he's not reliable, he's at least predictable. We all know the narratives about primetime Cousins. It's not so much primetime Cousins; it's tough opponents in primetime Cousins. And so last year, here's what happened in the versus primetime games, and he obviously played terribly. If you look at versus top 10 defenses, he averaged 14.5 fantasy points. Versus non-top 10, he averaged 23.3. So again, very predictable. Not surprisingly, when he has tough situations, he really chokes. I think that people were down on him or less high on him because he had this rough stretch of 4 opponents, and except for the New England game where he put up a big fantasy day, he kind of struggled. So people have this kind of sour taste in their mouth that Kirk cost me down week 8, 9, 10, 11 when I was trying to win for the fantasy playoffs. But looking at the his actual schedule this year, a couple things. There's 1 less red line, 2 less red lines. So he's got fewer of these top 10 opponents. And the red lines are well spaced out. You know when they're going to come. So if you know something bad's going to happen, but you at least know when it's going to happen, then you can accommodate for it. So we already know from Cousins that he takes a lot of hits and he's a tough guy. But we know he takes Tuesday off and he needs to go to his chiropractor. Seems like 10 hours a day for Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and he still can barely move. And he himself says it's not until like right before game time that he really feels back to himself. So Thursday night football, week 2 against Philadelphia, could be another repeat of last year, which was a disaster. San Francisco Monday Night Football, Denver Sunday Night Football, Cincinnati is time TBD, but that looks like a prime flex position. So yeah, we know that you're probably going to not be able to rely on Cousins on those games, but other than that, he's got a pretty favorable schedule, so that's why he is where he is. He's also somebody that, let me bring up a view that might be better, is a good high floor guy. So one of the things that we're doing projections, and we'll be using this, we're doing a lot of QA this year, emphasizing start-sit decisions that matter, like really looking for that flex spot or wide receiver 3 spot or RB2, the spot where we got to have some tough calls. And what we're looking at here is the model takes our projected stat, but also looks at a standard deviation above or below in the key fantasy stats, and then estimates what a player's floor is if he hits that standard deviation below. And so it's like if you are projected for 2 touchdowns, then a standard deviation below might be 1.2, and then the above might be 2.8, and that's how it works. So if you look at Cousins for week 1, we have him projected for 22.5 points. But let me make sure I'm looking at the right thing here. Let me bring up we're looking at 22.5 points. His low in our model is 10.2, which is actually higher than Russell Wilson above him, same as Lamar in that week. But his ceiling of 29.7 is less than Deshaun Watson, less than Joe Burrow, and less than Justin Fields, who's got that running component. So less than Trevor Lawrence. So he's one of those players that, again, very consistent, reliable, predictable, not going to break your heart. Or when he breaks your heart, he's going to break your heart. You should know better.
That's all you can ask for. Preparation.
Exactly. It's like, yeah, I tell my wife all the time, don't evaluate me by what I'm not doing. Evaluate by all the things I do. And what I don't like it when this, like, so every year I get a horrible argument with my wife for the last 18 years. And it's gotten worse the last 12 years because we had kids, that we go from 0 to 60. I go from, John and Jake got baseball handled. I'm great. I can be Mr. Father of the Year, go on vacations every 2 weeks, to be the nicest guy, so present. And then football season hits and I'm gone, right? So every year I'm like, this is going to happen. It's like, how does this happen every year? How do we have the same argument fight every year? But this is for another podcast about helping them.
But then what's going to happen, like with Cousins, when you're trying to compare him against, like, let's say another guy that's closely regarded, which is Dak. When like the experts, they have him just above Kirk Cousins in their rankings. But Kirk Cousins averaged 18 points per game for fantasy, and then Dak Prescott is only 17.8. Yes, it's close, but still, Cousins has more. Cousins has the 4th most amount of passing yards in the league last year at 4,547. And Dak Prescott, yes, he only played in 12 games, but if you expand that out over 17 games, that's still 500 less than Cousins in a year. So that's with Dalton Schultz playing with Dak, and then but Dalton Schultz is not there no more, so he has less weapons now this year. But people are still sleeping on Cousins as being a better fantasy player. But with the Vikings. Yeah. You know what they did? They added in Jordan Addison, and then they already had Hockenson already, and then you add that with Olsen. That particular group of people is better than what the Cowboys have. And with no Dalvin Cook going on there, then there's going to be more opportunities to pass the ball for them. So I see Kirk Cousins being better than some of what the experts are thinking with Dak Prescott. And also, if that offensive line of the Vikings can keep him from getting hit the second most in the league from last year, which was 643 hits from last year. That was second to Tom Brady. You know what Tom Brady's doing right now? He is retired. So we might need to protect him a little bit more in order to get these passing yards and touchdowns to be as what we think is like a top 8 fantasy player for quarterbacks.
One thing about Minnesota is we're actually not that high on them. You know, we have value on the under, which is good. So it's saying that, because in fantasy, you know, it's a different thing than actual win losses. And Kirk Cousins' stats were actually up the year before when Minnesota was disappointing in terms of record. So we think he's a safe bet. So if Minnesota's good again this year, it's because he's going to be playing well. If they're struggling, then he'll get garbage time. Come from
that is always great in fantasy, garbage time.
So yeah, so that's where you go.
Hail Marys.
Yeah. Or coming back from being down 33 in a halftime.
There's some speed concerns with Addison because his 40 wasn't that fast, but he can drive really fast. So,
right.
You know, he's got that covered.
Yeah, I mean, almost 3 times as fast as speed limit, but you know.
That's fine.
Right.
Nothing wrong with that.
Right. So we will definitely be giving you guys plenty of fantasy information as we get closer to the season, and NFL futures as we get closer. We're running out of time, but we want to quick hit at least one of our NBA topics. We talked about Golden State a lot and the whole Jordan Poole, Draymond Green, Chris Paul, the whole situation, what it looks like with who and without who. We have lots of situations here. So, Steven, at the end of this all, after all this trade stuff, what's the impact that we see for the Warriors going forward?
Yeah, real quick, I picked the Warriors as an example to talk about this, because one thing what we do is when there is a trade, we try to evaluate the impact of it, and then we, of course, compare it to the odds and determine if there's any future betting value. And one way to compare players' value in the NBA, at least, is looking at their presence and absence. And a lot of metrics focus on court plus minus, and how does the team do when you're on the court and off the court. And while that's valuable, I don't think it's quite representative of a player's true value, because I remember years ago, Shaquille O'Neal would often have a lower plus minus than teammates, because, you know, he was going in there fouling out the opposing bigs, you know, and wearing them out. And then the other guys would come in and kind of feast on a weakened team against the second unit. So what I like to do is look at teams, how they do when a player plays significant minutes and when they don't. And then evaluate a player on that strength. In addition to the sim model, also factoring that individuals' turnover rates, rebounding rates, shooting percentages, and the other things that we do for an NBA player. So with Jordan Poole, he shouldn't be criticized this, because one thing that's really important to see is that he played the last 2 years playoffs combined 191 of the 199 games. So he's commended to be playing, stay healthy and show up every day. But in the games that he missed, the team's defense was vastly improved. When he plays, he has a negative impact in kind of points allowed, and the team's point differential, again, small sample size, was not much better with him because of his defense. So and then versus Draymond Green, who he punched Jordan Poole. Draymond is a player that comes in and the team is 4 points better point differential when he plays, and it's the offense. What I like to see is this 28.3% right here. That's what Draymond shoots. And yet, despite him not being able to hit a three, the team's overall 3-point percentage is up nearly 1 percentage point when he's on the court. It just shows his value as a passer and how vital he plays on the team. So when the trade went down, and then Chris Paul's numbers, even in this down year, are also all positive in terms of defensive field goal percentage, especially. When you add we see a pretty actual improvement for Golden State. Had them up to nearly 7% chance of winning the championship, which is not quite good value at plus 1,300, which is Caesar, DraftKings, and other books. But I just checked this morning. I think FanDuel's at plus 1,400. So if you feel like making a way too early futures bet on the Warriors, that's the place
Never
to go.
too early.
Yeah.
So, sorry. One more thing about a couple of things about the Warriors. So with Jordan Poole, when he doesn't have a very tenuous work environment as he did last year, the last month of the 2021-2022 season, he made, without Steph Curry being there, he made the most 3-pointers, 85 3-pointers within that month. And then the team went 14-12. Now you spin it into this previous year. Yes, Jordan Poole was not the same guy as he was from before, but when he is comfortable, he can light it up from the 3-point range. And then his team was successful. I mean, albeit it was a small sample size in that. And then the other, yes, they traded away Poole, but then they also don't have Dante DiVincenzo, and he averaged 9 points a game. But then you add that with taking away Poole's 20 points per game. That's 29 points that they need to make up in between the additions of Chris Paul, which he only played 56. I think he played only 56 games this past year. So with the availability of him, then also they have maintenance games for Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, Draymond, and sometimes have maintenance games for Wiggins. Then it's going to be difficult for them to score a lot of points when those guys are not there consistently. Back-to-back games last year, they put in Poole. He averaged about 27 points this past season without Steph Curry being around. And also other people as well, because he wasn't going to get that many shots with just, let's say Klay Thompson playing too. So you have those 29 points being missing by Dante DiVincenzo and Poole being out. They're going to have to get those points from somewhere else. And I don't know if we're going to see Moses Moody and Kuminga adding more points than what they're doing right now, because they're playing 13 and 20 minutes respectively. So they're going to have to come up with those points just to be even from last year. So that's going to be a difficult part for the Warriors for this year.
I'm going to call an audible because Derek is really into minutia. And when you're playing player props, he's going to be awesome. He's going to find you an over 3.5 points for some dude with a weird name. But right now, I want to bring up this real quick.
Hey, Miles Plumlee made a lot of money for people last year.
I know. Jaylen Brown just re-signed for $304 million. And so I just ran some numbers, interesting things about him. And I love Jaylen Brown. I thought he was awesome, and ball handling aside in the playoffs. But it's interesting because he doesn't have that huge of an impact, and you just look at the sheer presence absence figures. They had a plus 6.2 win point differential in the games that he played, plus 5.8 when he didn't play, and again, very small sample size relatively of games he didn't play. The thing that I wanted to point out with Jaylen Brown is not that he's not worth $200 million. I actually think he is. It's this number. The ATS record when Jaylen Brown was out was 22-8 for Boston in this time frame. So what that means is Jaylen Brown, James Harden, there are a lot of players that people think are worth 2 or 3 or 4 points on the spread, but they aren't. In some cases, even if they're good players. So if Jaylen Brown let's say he plays very well the first week of the season. Let's say something happens, tweak something, so they decide to rest him. And it's Boston at home against Philadelphia. And Boston goes from, say, being a minus 4.5 point favorite with him to a pick-up, -1. Take Boston. So it's like that's the thing that he may not be, because he may not be worth that many points on the line as long as the other players, as long as blanking on everybody's name. But as long as the rest of the perimeter play, as long as Jason Tatum,
there's no more Marcus Smart there.
Yeah, as long as Tatum's there to play that wing, that you might get value when he rests, because people's perception of him and his value to the line may be higher than it actually is.
Right.
And if you want to do some more details, we can go into the Houston Rockets, but I don't think we will. That's one thing that we will do is one of my goals, is to serve the underserved audiences. As someone from a small market team like Baltimore, I always feel like national media outlets like ours don't properly cover small teams and teams that don't care about. So we're here for all these smaller market teams. And I had 15 beautiful minutes on the Houston Rockets and Jabari Smith. And unfortunately, I don't think we have time for you guys to hear that this week. But
yeah, this serves as a good teaser because we do have so much information to cover. Since we do cover every single sport, we have a lot to give to you guys. And again, as we get into NFL season, we'll of course start to focus heavy on that. There's a ton of good information for you guys to see. So please, in the comments, tell us what you liked, what you didn't, what you want to see next. We're here to serve the chat and show you guys what we're all capable of. So I'd call it a success for the first show here. I'm so glad everyone stayed in the chat, stayed active. We'd love to see that. We'll certainly see you next Tuesday. I'm glad you guys are all pumped up to see some of your favorite guys back here. And this won't be the end, only the beginning. So thank you guys, and we'll see you next Tuesday.